Okay, I should be live right now. Okay, let's see. Yeah, okay. All right, well, welcome anyone who's been waiting. Thank you so much for joining me in this live stream. I kind of just felt, you know what, I have the day free and yeah, I just wanted to try sharing my story in a live stream, see how that works. And yeah, so I've been spending the past 2 years posting my story of why I left Islam and what issues I faced with it and how I kind of got over it just on social media in these little written posts. So this was before I decided to, do videos and show my face. And I figured, you know what, it might be easier for some people to just watch it all in one video instead of scrolling through hundreds and hundreds of posts. And so, yeah, that's why I decided to do this video. It's going to be loosely structured. So I'm kind of just going to go through from the beginning to about when I left, which was when I was 18. I'm 32 now. So I've been an ex-Muslim and an atheist for nearly half my life. But it did take a long time to, I guess the best way of putting it is to just reconstitute my whole life philosophy after I left Islam. And that process, I don't know how many years it took. Is just one of those things where you just wake up one day and you realize, okay, I'm a completely different person and I'm enjoying life and I don't have to believe in a God. I don't have to believe in Islam or any other religion to get to that place. And if anything, if there's anything I want people to take away from this channel, it's that idea that you don't need to have a God in your life. You don't need to have a promise of an afterlife or, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, objective justice, objective truth, objective good and bad and all that to be able to lead a meaningful, fulfilling life. And I'm a living example of that. I'm not saying that my life is perfect or anything like that, but I face all the challenges I face in life and I accept that this life might be the only thing I have. And it doesn't stop me from enjoying life despite those challenges. If anything, I try to see those challenges as things to overcome and that will make me ultimately a better person. Not because some God says so, but because that's what I would like to believe about my life. And it's what I can observe in the reality around me. So yeah, if anyone wants to take anything from this channel, I hope it's that. You're not alone if you have those thoughts and feelings about whatever religion you happen to be in, and there is a way out of it, and there is a life that can be had without it. So yeah, I'll get going with just talking about, I guess I'll go to the early beginnings. Let's see here. I have a little list of things I was going to talk about. All right, so I wanted to start by just talking about my upbringing and how I was introduced to Islam in my life originally. So I have a bit of a complicated background. I'm originally Palestinian. My parents are both Palestinian. I personally have never been to Palestine, though. I was born outside of Palestine. Long story short, my father is a refugee and he met my mother somewhere else, and they ultimately settled down in the United Arab Emirates, which is a country in the Persian Gulf, Arabian Gulf. It's next to Saudi Arabia, just south of Iran. And while it's next to those pretty religious countries, it's a bit more of a relaxed country when it comes to Islam. There's lots of tourists that come in, and I think the government there just struck a balance. I would say like a hypocritical balance between trying to placate those who really want a traditional Islamic basis for society, and all those Westerners who are coming in and, you know, don't want to be expected to have the women wearing hijabs, and they don't want to basically be under the control of a totalitarian Islamic society. So yeah, I guess that's the best way of describing how I was introduced to Islam. I can't remember exactly when I was first told about it. It's just kind of one of those things where, you're told this is what life is. Everything came from this being called God, and he loves you, and he everything that's good comes from him, and he punishes you if you're bad. And there's all these angels, and there's this devil. So all this stuff was pretty much with me from a very early age, probably around 3 or 4, maybe even younger. I don't really know when my parents introduced those ideas to me. And I always knew I was Muslim as well. I didn't really understand what that entailed. I just thought, well, everybody's Muslim. And that's because that's what God wants us to be. And it's only when I moved to Canada when I was around 4 years old that I was introduced to other religions and other cultures. So I spent the first three to 4 years of my life living in Dubai, and I moved to Canada. And that's when I encountered Christians, I encountered Jews, I encountered people from all sorts of religions. And that's when the idea was introduced to me that, well, I'm Muslim and that makes me different from all these other people. But what my parents tried to teach me was that as long as you're a good person, that's all that matters. And God will see that you're a kind, good person and will reward you in heaven. And heaven was this idea in my head of, well, this is the goal that you're aspiring to in your whole life, and it's just this perfect place of happiness where you're going to be with all your loved ones, all your relatives, and you're just going to be there for eternity with God. So it's hard to really kind of explain why I believe that so willingly. I suppose it just falls into the realm of things that, well, my parents are telling me this. All the people around me who I trust for everything else, the people who feed me, clothe me, teach me, take care of me, are telling me this. So I see no reason for it to not be true. And I did sort of grasp that this is something that isn't, you can't experience this thing immediately in the world around you. It's something that transcends this world, but it's there all around us all the same. But for me, the difference was kind of semantics. It's just, this is the life here, and then you go on to the afterlife. And so all of this stuff was taught to me by my parents without much in the way of, really drilling it down into me or forcing it down my throat. It was just part of my identity and who I was. I wouldn't say I was particularly religious or did much that was Islamic in those early years, like 5, 6, 7, in those years. It was just a thing to say, like, I'm Muslim, I believe in God, and we didn't really pray much. I actually didn't start praying until I moved back to Dubai when I was 8 years old. So I spent 4 or 5 years living in the West, in Canada, and a year in the UK. And when I was in the UK, I went to, I think it was an Anglican school. I can't remember exactly which denomination of Christianity it was, but I was one of the few Muslim kids in class, and everyone around me was Christian, and we had to read Psalms or from the Bible, or I can't even remember, every morning. And there was some sort of Christianity class. I remember coloring in like lessons about Jesus with the wine and turning the wine into water and doing something with fish. I can't remember. And that's when my parents started telling me a bit more about why there was this difference. So you have these Christians, and they believe in the same God that we believe in, but they're different. And I didn't really ask why we were different, because it seemed kind of obvious to me. Well, my background's Arab, Palestinian, and I'm in this country surrounded by initially Canadian people and then British people. Obviously, we have all these differences, so I guess they have their God, and then there's mine. And it was around this point that it was probably introduced to me as well that my religion and my God, my version of my God, the way I worshipped him and how I obeyed him, was better than the other ones. I don't think this was something that was blatantly told to me by my parents. It was just something I naturally assumed because, well, I think a lot of people from a lot of cultures have this feeling that, we kind of have the best thing going on here. And that was impressed on me as well. Arabic food is better, and our culture, our language is more sophisticated. So I had all these ideas, and I suppose Islam was lumped in with it as well. So yeah, that's the early stuff. And it's really only when I moved back to Dubai, so I was 8 years old at this point, that Islam was properly introduced to me. So up till that point, I don't think I'd ever been to a mosque to pray. My parents seemed to be very relaxed on that kind of stuff. The only kinds of things we'd used to do was fast for Ramadan. I wouldn't because I was still too young, but people in my family would, and we'd celebrate all of the big festivals of Islam, like Eid al-Adha, Eid al-Fitr, but that was pretty much it. But when I moved to Dubai, it was in the 4th grade, so this is in the late 90s, and as part of the curriculum in the school I went to in the UAE, you had to be taught Islamic education when you're Muslim. So mandatory, pretty much. And that's where I really got taught about Islam. So it was just a class like any other class. So I'd have, a couple classes of English, math, science, or whatever it was. And then I'd have Islamic education period. And so that's where I was first really introduced to the Quran. We had one in our house, but I hadn't really touched it. And that's where I was also introduced to the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad. And for the most part, in those early years, we were just expected to memorize verses from the Quran, memorize select hadiths that were picked for us in the curriculum that were in the textbook. And my teacher, Mr. Muhammad, would kind of just explain to us the context a little bit and tell us how to interpret those verses, because the thing that I found difficulty with when I was trying to read those Quran verses, and less so the hadiths, was that it was in this Arabic that was very different than the Arabic that I spoke in case anyone's watching doesn't know this about Arabic, there's really two kinds of Arabic that exist. So there's the formal kind, or Fusha is what it's called in Arabic. And that's the kind of Arabic that you'll often see in books or newspaper articles, and the kind of Arabic people will speak in when, like news anchors on TV, and for formal things like speeches, that kind of stuff. And then there's the stuff that people actually, the slang, I guess, that people talk in. So it's more casual, different words for everything, and it differs from region to region. So as a Palestinian, there was a certain way that I spoke, certain slang words that I used that maybe someone from Saudi Arabia wouldn't use, or someone from Libya or Egypt wouldn't use. But pretty much every Arab learns or knows how to understand the Fusha kind of Arabic. So it's a universal Arabic in that sense. But the Quran Arabic was more close to the formal kind, but it was very archaic and hard for me to understand. There were a lot of words in there that I didn't know, that wasn't familiar with, and I didn't understand what they meant in the context anyway, in that context that they were being used in, which is why it was very important, I suppose, that we had a teacher explaining it all to us, which later on I kind of found problematic for reasons I'll get into a bit later in the stream. But yeah, so it was this very foreign Arabic to me, and I was expected to just memorize it. And that's what Islamic education was for me in the beginning. Just read this, memorize it, regurgitate it, and just do what the teacher tells you. Like, remember what the teacher told you this meant and this meant. And we'd have to also read from the Quran. There's a poetic way of reading it that's taught in schools as well. I was always terrible at that. And so from early on, I didn't do well, pretty much, at Islamic education. So I was a pretty good student in almost everything else, but Islamic education was my weakest subject. And that's probably why I started feeling, um, I wouldn't say guilt necessarily. The guilt came on a little bit later, but I felt like I had something to prove when it came to Islamic education, or just the subject of Islam, because it wasn't really something that was talked about at my house, and I wasn't doing well at it at school, and I was struggling to read it properly, to understand the words in the Quran. And so I felt this need to do more, and that, I guess, became a need to be a better Muslim. And early on, I'd say fifth grade, sixth grade, so I would have been 8 or 9 years old. That's when the really intense Islamic teaching started creeping in. So you'd have the lessons from select verses from the Quran and from select hadiths, but at the same time, Mr. Muhammad, our Islamic education teacher, would tell us different anecdotes and stories about Islam, and tell us different things about the religion. So he'd tell us about what would happen to you after death. So there was this paradise where you're with all your loved ones, and this paradise was tiered. So the more the more good you were, the better your dwelling, and the better neighborhood you would have in heaven. And if you were bad, you would go to hell. And what basically happened was, you'd get this book of deeds. There were these angels who would be watching your they would be watching your constant movements, and they'd be with you wherever you went. And if you did something good, it would go down in this book. And if you did something bad, it would go down in this other book. And at the end of it all, once you were dead and the day of judgment had come, you would be given the book of your deeds. And if you're given it in your right hand, great, you're going to paradise. If you're given it in your left hand, that means you did more bad than good, and you're going to go to hell. And just a kind of visual image of that in my mind was, so I have these two angels watching me all the time, scrutinizing me for everything I'm doing. And then there's, of course, Allah watching me, I guess, doing the same thing. I didn't really think about why he needed to delegate these two angels to do it. It was just, I felt like I was constantly being monitored and watched. So I didn't really dwell on this all the time. But when I did do something bad, it would come across like, oh no, Allah saw me do this. This is bad. Whether it was just lying, or I wasn't that bad of a kid. I didn't do much that was evil or sinful, but I did do things like lie. I'd steal sometimes, or I'd have bad thoughts or hateful thoughts about classmates or teachers, or I'd be really rude to my parents, which is a big no-no in Islam. And I think, oh no, God's going to be judging me for this. And I think that's when the guilt started coming in. So one of the main reasons I was guilty was because I was taught, okay, so as a Muslim, you're supposed to pray 5 times a day. And they're interspersed throughout the day, starting in the morning up to the late evening. And there was one day in school, so this would have been maybe 4th grade, so soon after I moved back to Dubai the second time, when our teacher told us, okay, we're going to the mosque and we're going to pray together. And it dawned on me at that moment that, oh, I don't even know how to pray. My parents never taught me. It just never came up. And I panicked. Like when I got home that day and I knew I had to pray in the school mosque the next day, I just instinctively knew that this was something bad. Like if my teacher and my fellow students found out that I couldn't even pray, I already wasn't doing well in that class. And I was already different from everyone else because I'd spent the past 4 years living in the West. I think I had a bit of a British accent at the time because I just come from the UK. So I already stood out in all these ways, and I was thinking, oh no, I'm going to stand out in this way as well. And they're going to think I'm just this sinner, and I don't even know how to be a Muslim. So I really wanted to avoid doing that. And so I went to my parents. I think I started with my mom, and I asked her, "Can you teach me how to pray? I have to pray for school tomorrow." And she just kind of gave me this glazed look, like, "Oh, I don't know how to pray." And I was stunned. Even though we hadn't prayed before, I figured, well, she's Muslim, she must know. And she just had no idea. And she always kind of laughed it off. And I asked my father as well, and he pretty much had the same reaction. He just said, "I don't know." And I didn't really get any help from them. Like, they didn't try to find anything for me, or try to I guess Google wasn't a thing back then, but they didn't look it up on the internet. And I just remember feeling like, wow, my parents both don't know how to pray. They're just sinners. And luckily, I have a younger brother, and he had one of those illustrated books that actually had a detailed list of steps that you're supposed to do to pray and to actually do the wudu before prayer. And I borrowed the book, and I just spent that evening scrambling to try and learn how to do it, how to try to do, and try to memorize all the different little things you have to memorize to do the prayers, and memorizing all the steps, and rushing to the bathroom to do the wudu, which is basically just like washing parts of your body with water. And I'd do it, and then like think, oh shoot, what the hell did I miss? And I'd run back to my book, and I remember I was starting to ruin the book because the pages were getting wet from me trying to do the wudu, and then rushing back and turning the pages like, oh no, I missed this. I have to try it again. And I was just desperate to get it all right so no one noticed that there was anything off about me. And this took hours. And eventually, by the time it was bedtime, I pretty much had it. And the next morning, or the next afternoon, when we had to go pray, I forgot quite a bit of it because it was just panic mode at that moment. And I managed to just fake my way through it. And that kind of really established my relationship with Islam. It felt like this thing that I was supposed to be doing, but I didn't know how to do it properly. And I was afraid everyone around me would notice that I wasn't doing it properly, and that I'd be exposed, that I'm not a real Muslim. I already felt like I wasn't a real Arab because I'd spent so many years living in the West. I already felt like this big outsider because I just noticed I thought differently than others. And I didn't talk like anyone else around me. And I just wanted to limit as much as possible the ways that I was an outsider. So after that, I really stepped up my efforts to be a Muslim. I was like, I have to learn how to pray, and I have to pray as much as possible. The 5 prayers a day thing was something I always struggled with. I knew I had to do it, but I really didn't successfully manage to do it that often. It was this combination of laziness, and I guess that's what it was, laziness, and feeling like, well, almost like like someone who's addicted to cigarettes, thinking, oh, I can always just quit later. So I had this feeling that, oh, I can always just catch up on my prayers later, and it will be fine. It was this bargain I was doing with myself to just spare myself the effort of doing it. And I think just because my parents weren't doing it around me, I didn't feel this pressure to do it. If anything, there were a lot of times where I would pray in secret in my bedroom because I didn't want my parents to comment on it or bring it up, because again, I just had the suspicion that they were sinners and they wouldn't understand, or they would feel weird about it. It's hard to really explain, but it was, so I had this guilt from that at the time. But I also started noticing that I was having this uh, antagonistic relationship with my parents when it came to the subject of Islam. With everything else, my relationship with my parents was completely normal. But when it came to Islam, I started having this judgmental attitude towards them of like, wow, you don't even know what you're doing. Like, you're sinners. You're not. I noticed that my parents wouldn't really fast properly. My dad he wouldn't eat, but he'd still drink coffee and smoke cigarettes. And I point that out to him, and he said, I'm still fasting. And so I just thought my parents were just these lazy Muslims. And I noticed that there were a lot of people like that around me in the community, whether it was family, friends, or neighbors. People were Muslim, but they didn't do the prayers. They didn't fast properly. They didn't do everything that they were supposed to do. And I felt like, wow, they're going to hell, and I'm a better Muslim than them. And I think if I was to psychoanalyze myself today, I think that those feelings of judgment were to deflect from my own guilt about my inadequacy about being a Muslim. And if I were to theorize a bit, I suspect that's why a lot of Muslims are pretty judgmental towards ex-Muslims like myself, or people they consider to be sinful Muslims, or women who don't wear the hijab or whatever, because they're doing it because they're not entirely because of this, but I think it's partially to deflect from their own feelings of inadequacy for the things they know that they're not doing properly as Muslims. So yeah, I'm going to take a little bit of a pause here just to see if anyone has joined me. All right. Yeah, I have a few messages. Hey, Malik. Thank you so much. I think if you had asked me 10 years ago, would I be doing a YouTube live stream where I'm showing my face and just spilling my beans about all this really sensitive, and I guess some of it is pretty embarrassing stuff about my life and my feelings about Islam, I would have told you, no way. I wasn't Muslim anymore, but I didn't want to talk about it. It was just something that was always buried in my head. And even when I started doing social media stuff, the idea was, I'm going to do this anonymously. So I'm not going to show my face. I'm not going to show my name. And it's just going to be text posts. And I'm going to leave it at that. And after I did that for a year and a half, I felt, you know what? If anything, I guess I wanted to try and show people that it's okay to show your face, because I'm in a position where I live in Canada now, and I'm not in danger. I don't have to fear about anyone coming to kill me, or someone from my family discovering that I'm an ex-Muslim. I'm doing this on YouTube. I do have family members who don't know that I'm doing this, and I keep it secret from them. And that's why I decided to use an anonymous pseudonym for this. So Alim isn't my real name. But I wanted people to see that it's okay to show your face at least, because I think that will encourage others to, connect with it more, because I think it's easier to connect with a person when you can see them and actually hear them than written posts, no matter how eloquently worded they are or how much they echo the experiences of others. So I want to kind of be the face for others who just can't. And so far, so good. I haven't gotten any death threats or anything. I know some other ex-Muslims who are active in the community aren't so lucky. I mean, I guess I've been threatened that I'll be going to hell and that God will give me a reckoning on the day of judgment and all that. So I guess that's like post-death threats. So I'm okay with those. And I guess the thing I always tell those Muslims when they tell me that is, okay, I'll wait and see. And if you're right, you're right. And I suppose I'll just tell God, well, you gave me this mind and you gave me this skepticism and these thoughts. So I could only do what was true to those. So basically it's God's fault. Let's see, we have another message here from Darius, who's an ex-Muslim atheist from Malaysia, and he's just going to wish us all an amazing day. Thank you so much, Darius. Thanks for checking it out. And if anyone wants to ask me any questions at any point, feel free to just ask them in the live chat, and I'll try to answer them once I see them. But for now, I'm just going to keep going with my story. So let's see, where are we at now? So growing up Muslim in the UAE, I had this guilt, and I had a bit of an antagonistic relationship with my parents, which I didn't really express to them. It would come out, and I'd have snide remarks or comments or veiled jokes at them. I'd talk about how nobody touches the Quran in our house and just collecting dust. I was pretty much the only one who would read from it. And basically, I would have this thing where I would have a phase where I really didn't do anything Islamic. Like pretty much nothing beyond just the stuff I had to do for my Islamic education classes. And then I'd have the phases where I'd feel guilty about that and try to do everything possible. So I'd try to do the 5 prayers a day. I would try reading from the Quran every day. And in Ramadan, I would really escalate the effort. So there was a thing that was popular with my classmates where you'd read a chapter, a surah from the Quran every day. Or I think there was a way of doing it. There was a way of doing it where it was equally divided across the 30 days. And so I'd do that, and I'd fast, and I remember feeling this glowing pride when I did all those things. I felt like I'm finally doing what Allah wants me to do. And when this is more of a Christian thing, but when Christians talk about feeling or experiencing the Holy Spirit of God, I guess, I think those moments were the closest where I had that feeling, because I really would feel like there was something with me. I would feel like Allah was with me and watching me and was happy with me, and I could feel this love within me when I did these good things. And that's what made it harder when I guess I guess the best word to use is relapse. I would relapse and I would stop praying, and I wouldn't read the Quran as much, and I'd start doing things like lying and stealing again. And I just feel terrible. And I think one of the reasons why I felt terrible was beyond just the guilt of disappointing God, was this fear of hell. So around this time, I'm still 9, 10 years old, is when I was taught, and my classmates were taught in school about the punishments of hell. So there's a verse, there's an ayah in the Quran, I can't remember where it is exactly, but it basically talks about how one of the punishments for the disbelievers is that their skin will be melted off from I suppose, the intense heat and fire of hell. But then your skin would grow back, only for it to melt off again. So it was just a cycle of skin melting off and then growing back and melting off and growing back. And I thought about other things, like how you would be constantly thirsty, like no matter how much you drank, sorry, no matter how much you drank, your thirst would never be quenched. And anyway, what you're drinking is like boiling hot water or something like that. And you'd go for a piece of fruit, but it would all be spiked and thorny, so your mouth would bleed from the inside. And that was what happened to you if you sinned more than you did good, or if you left God. And for me, it was pretty much interchangeable, really. It was just stuck in my head, this notion that if I do more bad than good, then this is what's going to happen to me. And I had a second Islamic education teacher who was also called Mr. Muhammad, starting from the 7th grade, and he took it up a notch. Like, he took it to the next level, where he'd constantly be mentioning these things about that we should expect in hell. And I think he did it for our benefit. He, from his perspective, I suppose, and I can see the argument for it, it was a good thing to teach kids this, because it kept them in check. It kept them self-monitoring their own behavior, to always know that this is what happens to the non-believers or the sinners or whatever you want to call them. So it's kind of like having an internal policeman, I suppose, who makes sure you're always doing a good thing. So one of the things that terrified me the most in those early years was the talk about the Day of Judgment. So there's a similar concept in Christianity, and what it basically is that there will come this time, and as Mr. Muhammad would often say, that where the signs are upon us, and this could happen at any moment. So be prepared and make sure you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. And on this day of judgment, I think it's the angel Jibril, I might be wrong about that, it might be another angel, would blow this trumpet. And when this trumpet sounded, every living human on earth would die, and their souls would rise up for judgment. But before that happened, there would be all these horrendous apocalyptic events happening all around the world. There would be the Antichrist who would emerge. He's called the Dajjal in Arabic, and this person would pretend to be Jesus returns. So that's something that Muslims also believe, that Jesus will come back on the day of judgment. But this false Jesus will appear, and he will look like Jesus, but true believers will be able to detect that he isn't actually Jesus. But all the followers who end up being tricked by this Dajjal, this Antichrist, will end up going to hell with him. And so that was one thing I was paranoid about. Like, what if I'm tricked by the Dajjal? What if I'm like, I just want to do the right thing. I just want to follow the right person because I want to go to heaven. And now this Antichrist is showing up and he's trying to trick us. So the devil is already trying to trick me all the time anyway, whispering in my ear, which is another thing I was taught from a very young age. Whenever I'm thinking of doing something bad, it's because the devil is whispering in my ear. And then there was all the jinn, which I guess are demon spirits that exist in an alternate dimension or reality. I never was really clear on where they were, but anyway, they are these, some of them were evil beings that would also try to possess you or whisper in your ear and make you do bad things. So I had all these things to worry about, and then there were all the other signs of the day of judgment that were encroaching on our world, supposedly. So Mr. Muhammad would say that one of the signs of Judgment Day would be that there would be wars everywhere, and the number of wars would be increasing. And he'd point out, well, if you look at the news, there's wars happening everywhere. And I'd say, he's right, there are wars everywhere. And he'd say that there'd be droughts all around the world. And I'd be like, there are droughts all around the world. And I would come back home and I just watch the news and like, oh no, there's another war. And I just check to see if it was raining in some parts of the world, because then it would be like, oh, phew, okay, it's raining here. We're good for now. And I think there were other signs like the Arab world would be in turmoil and there would be internal rifts in it, and the external world, the world of the West, which I guess back in the Prophet Muhammad's time would be the Byzantine Empire, and I guess for us today would be the American Empire, would be taking over our world. And I was like, yes, that is what's happening. The Arabic world is falling apart and all these Arab countries hate each other and we're totally under the thumb of America, and Israel is rampant. And so I was thinking, oh no, like the day of judgment could be happening at any moment, and I'd have nightmares about it. Sometimes I'd hear a loud noise, especially in the early morning, and I think, is that the trumpet that's going to bring the day of judgment? I was so terrified that if it happened at this moment, I didn't have time to pray enough. I didn't have time to do everything I was supposed to do as a good Muslim. Do I have enough good deeds to get into heaven? Because that's it. Like once it's over, it's over. And there were other things Mr. Muhammad would say about this hell stuff that kind of confused me. Like he would say, one of the things he told me, and I don't know if this is canonical to Islam or not, because I can't remember ever coming across it anywhere else, but he'd sometimes say that if you're a non-believer, you're going to hell forever. But if you're a good Muslim and you did some bad things, you'd still go to paradise. You just go to hell for a bit. So I suppose it's like paying your debt to God by suffering this excruciating torture in hell. So how he described it was, there's this bridge and you have to cross this bridge to get to paradise, and underneath this bridge is hell. And he'd tell us that if you were a good Muslim and like you did everything right and you obeyed God and all of his commands, you would sprint effortlessly across down this bridge across this valley that has hell at the bottom of it. But if you were Muslim, I mean, sorry, if you were a sinner and you had committed sins in your life, then the bridge would disappear under your feet and you would plummet down into hell. And depending on how bad you are, you'd spend, I don't know, he didn't really get into that, but basically you'd spend as much time as Allah deemed fit for you to spend before you went up to paradise. And I remember being terrified about that as well, because I just visualized this bridge and I'd think, oh, I just imagine being in that position and hoping and praying that the bridge wouldn't disappear beneath me. And I just remember really thinking about that feeling, like that, like sinking in your chest when you just suddenly fall, like maybe when you're walking down stairs and you think there's one more step and there isn't. And so your body just panics, I guess, for a moment. So I had this feeling too that would probably be 100 times worse when you just fall through and then you're in hell. And I do remember thinking at the time that it's a little bit weird that so God sent you to just be tortured for a bit, and then you just go up to heaven and everything's all right. Like there's no friction there whatsoever. You're all good. But I didn't think about it too much because Allah knows best, and He's my creator. Everything around here is because of Him. I owe my existence to Him. So obviously, what He says is the best. So I was terrified about these things, and I'd sometimes bring it up to my parents, and I didn't find this out until later on, but my parents actually went to my school and complained about Mr. Muhammad, saying, why is he teaching our kids all of this intense hell stuff when they're still so young? Because he did stray from the curriculum when he talked about this stuff. It would be in the curriculum here and there, because if you ever read the Quran, it is chock full of warnings to the non-believers, the disbelievers, about what punishments will await them in hell. Maybe, I don't know, this might be a bit of an exaggeration, but it's almost on every page. And so I knew it was there, which kind of just supplemented what Mr. Muhammad was saying. I had to be vigilant, and I had to do the right thing because I didn't want to go to hell. So, as I mentioned before, I didn't really do many bad things beyond lying and cheating and stealing sometimes. But once I hit puberty and I started, developing all that stuff that comes with being like a young teenage boy, and I started looking at girls differently, I started looking at women around me differently, that's when the guilt really hit another level. And I would say it became shame as well. Because what I was taught was, you're not supposed to do anything sexual with a woman until marriage, and anything sexual with a woman is a huge sin, and masturbation is a huge sin as well. Touching yourself is very bad for you. And I'd hear all the things that I think other kids would hear about it in more religious countries, that if you masturbated a lot, everyone would know because you'd have really hairy knuckles. And I remember my biology teacher, and I believed this for years. My biology teacher told us once that if you masturbate too much when you're a teenager, then you're not going to be able to have kids when you're older, because your sperm is diluted, or your sperm reservoirs are all dried up. So I believe that too. And it was just really difficult for me because, as anyone who was a teenage boy can understand, like I'd have these intense feelings and intense desires, and I just had to suppress them and shut them off. I was like, no, this isn't for me now. This is for marriage. This is for when I'm an adult. This is inappropriate. This is going to send me to hell. This is one of the worst things. Zina is one of the worst things you can do as a Muslim. And I think the result of that happening was, the result of that was, what happened was that I found myself, I guess it would be the best thing to say would be to drawn to doing it. And then I'd have the cycle of, like, let's say I'd masturbate this one time, and then I have this shame spiral afterwards. And then I'd come back again. It would really, when I think about it, it really does describe the behavior of someone who's addicted to something. Um, I don't know in this context what the addiction is exactly, but I just had a very unhealthy relationship with all that stuff. I avoided girls for the most part because I went to a boys' school, so there were girls in my school, but boys and girls were separated in different sections, so I didn't really see them often. And I felt that, well, this was what society's supposed to be. You're only supposed to see girls once you're an adult and you're ready for marriage. So staying away from them is a good idea. And yet I still felt myself really drawn to wanting to interact with them and wanting to see them. And because I didn't very often, then my fixation was on the female teachers in my school. If there was one female teacher who was just a little bit attractive, I would I would say it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say she'd be harassed, and by some people sexually harassed by classmates and by older boys in my school. I'd see it all the time, and there would be scribblings about the more attractive ones in the boys' bathroom and all that. And so I realized at that point that I wasn't the only one. Like, everyone was just suppressing this desire and trying to just find an outlet to express it uh, without, I suppose, jeopardizing our innocence or our standing in front of God and society. And yet it would still come out in all these, I would say, unhealthy ways. And that's when I also started thinking about all the different ways that sexuality is wrong. So I had access to movies, TV shows, and uh, all that kind of stuff, and books from the Western world, and a lot of them would have gay characters, lesbians. Homosexuality was something that I'd often see in movies and TV shows, and I had this idea in my head that, well, this is A, disgusting, repulsive, and B, a horrible sin. And this was something that I was taught in school in Islamic education class, and something that kind of was unspoken. Well, maybe unspoken isn't the word for it. It was assumed, because if anyone exhibited any kind of feminine behavior amongst my classmates, they would be teased and taunted and humiliated for it. And so we were always policing each other in that way. And I'd sometimes see people outside of school who I would think in my head, oh, that person's definitely gay. Maybe because they're a little bit effeminate or whatever. And I'd think, oh, wow, they're going to go to hell. And I would be repulsed by them. I'd think, like, wow, this is what they do with other men. That's horrible. And so just overall, I just had this very unhealthy relationship with my own sexuality, which was completely and utterly suppressed, and a very judgmental attitude towards sexualities that were outside of the norm. And the shame really came to be this problem for me because I just couldn't find a way to resolve it. And this is something I talked about in another live stream I did, but I'd make these vows, commitments to myself that, okay, for this month of Ramadan, I'm not gonna masturbate for the whole month, which at the time for me was record-breaking time. And I wasn't gonna watch any porn as well. Porn was something that was limited access in the UAE, but you could find it if you were diligent and worked really hard to find it. And we'd share it amongst us in school as well. So, which was also another source of shame for myself. But anyway, so I'd make these vows of myself, and I think because I made it so big in my head and thinking that if I fail this, then God is going to judge me, and this is going to be another sin in the book, and God is watching me when I do these filthy, disgusting things. It just put so much pressure, and I'd cave. I'd always cave because it just felt like this bag of bricks on my chest or my back or whatever. And once I just let go and I stopped suppressing myself, in that moment, it was just releasing. I felt like I was completely free. But then the guilt and the shame would immediately return. And I felt like, wow, so I'm not praying as much as I should be. Sure, I'm not eating pork. Sure, I'm not drinking alcohol. Sure, I'm fasting for Ramadan, but I'm really not doing anything else that I'm supposed to be doing. I don't have the word of God on my mouth, on my lips all the time. And I'm doing this horrible thing that I know is a sin, that I know is bad, and I can't stop myself from doing it day in, day out. I can't stop myself from just looking at an attractive woman, whether it's in a movie or in a magazine or in my school or in the mall. And I know I shouldn't, and I still am doing it. And so I was pretty sure I was going to go to hell at that point in my life. And with the fear that the day of judgment was coming along at any moment, it was just this like battle inside me of I'm not doing good enough, but I'm not doing, and this could end at any moment. And yet I don't really want to do anything differently, or it just feels like my natural instinct was to not. I understood why things like praying were helpful, or things like not lying and not stealing, but this like the desire to just express my sexuality was something that I just couldn't stop. It had, in a way, it had complete control over me, like, because I felt like it was something I had to do to exist. I just couldn't resist the urge, and that's probably why I guess I could call it like me. Like I felt like it was an addiction, and I was trying to break this addiction. Anyway, on that note, let's see if we have anyone messaging. All right, there are a couple of questions here. So I'll take a break from all the sex and masturbation guilt talk. So, ultra significant footnote asks, do you think it is natural for a person to be an atheist, but it is also natural for someone to be a theist? Greetings from the Netherlands. Hello, friend from the Netherlands. So, natural is kind of an interesting word to use there, because what I was taught when I was a Muslim was that we all have this innate understanding and desire to be with God, to connect with the tawheed, or oneness of God. And at the same time, I think it's clear to see that children are taught the various religions that they're taught. I mean, if you're born in one culture, what theists will say is that, well, every culture has some sort of god or some sort of religion as a basis, but a lot of those religions are very different. Sure, the biggest religions today are monotheistic, but there's been many religions over the millennia that weren't monotheistic whatsoever. There's been, I think, it probably wouldn't be an exaggeration to say tens of thousands of gods. So it's tough to say that it's natural to be theistic. I think it's natural for us to want to explain what's happening around us. I think we're practical creatures, and we try to find solutions to our problems, and we try to assign meaning to everything around us. So this piece of wood, I can use it to burn in a fire, or this piece of wood, I can turn it into an axe handle, or things like that. So we're always looking for meaning and purpose behind everything. And I don't think that necessarily has to come from a god, a theistic one or a polytheistic religion that has many gods. I think the universal thing that's natural for humans is that we're looking for meaning, and we want to find the big answers to life and answer the big mysteries and the big unknowns. And so I would say that is natural. And for some people, they gravitate towards religious solutions. And for some people, they gravitate towards non-religious atheistic solutions, if that makes sense. All right. And another question from Malik. So Malik is asking, how would you say your secular identity informs your current politics, if at all? That's an interesting one. Well, so I'm in Canada, and I support the Green Party, although I'm not very happy with the current Green Party right now for reasons I won't get into in this video. But basically, I think my secular identity does inform my politics because I don't believe there's an afterlife. I don't believe that there's an objective good or a God watching out for us who'll make everything better, or that everything bad that's happening is because of this God and it will all be rectified in the end. So I feel like all we have to rely upon is ourselves as human beings to make the world a better place. And we have these impending crises that are coming close, whether it's climate change or water shortages or whatever it is, that could drastically alter our way of life and could plausibly wipe us out as a species. And I think for some of the more fatalistic people who are religious, and I know this is true for some Muslims because I've heard them say it, they have this feeling that, well, these bad things are happening because it's the will of God, and maybe they're just signs of the day of judgment. And if you're a Muslim and you truly believe that, then bad things happening right now that might be ushering in the day of judgment is a good thing, because ultimately the objective is to move on to the next life. As Muslims are taught, and as I was taught when I was Muslim, this life is ephemeral, and it is not the main thing that should be focused on. It is not the most important thing. The most important thing is the life beyond this one, the afterlife, the paradise in eternity with Allah. So I think when people have that mentality, I'm not saying that they don't care about the people around them or the world they live in, but it's not as intense of a, a desire to make things better and working together with others to address the issues that we're facing. And I say this, I can't generalize for all Muslims to say that they all feel like this. I'm just saying that for me, that was a natural conclusion that I took from the Islamic ideology, or the thought process was pretty natural, that this life doesn't matter as much. So bad things happen. It's okay. God wills it, and it will all be better in paradise anyway. And that definitely impacted my view of the world, where I just felt, well, shit, man, things are bad, and that is what it is. So I almost had this apathy about it, and I think for the most part, I've gotten rid of that apathy to try and advocate for making things better in this world, because it's the only world we know we have for sure. And beyond just that, I'd say the right-wing parties tend to be a bit more conservative when it comes to things like traditions and family values, the importance of marriage, banning abortions. I think these are things that are universal between the Christian right-wingers that you'll find in Europe and North America, and Muslim right-wingers. They believe in a lot of the same things, even if they're coming at it from different religions, and they hate each other. And seeing that I come from this secular background and an atheist background, I do value the role of tradition in life, but the problem with tradition is, as I saw the case in my own life and I saw all around me, is that I'm trying to think of the word to use here. It just sticks people into this position where they're just inflexible to change, because they're always looking backwards to the past. They're thinking, well, we have to do the things how it was always done. We have to stick to the things that have always bound us together, family and Islam and all that. But but the problem that comes with that is, what if those things are the cause of the problem? So what if things that come from Islam need to be changed, but you can't change them because it's tradition and you have to keep it the same? And what if family values are constricting people, where they can't even express themselves because they have to stick to the family? So for me, I'm more progressive in that sense, where I think that it is important to have a community and values and traditions, but they should be more flexible, and they shouldn't be bound to any religion or ethnicity in that kind of way. We should be aspiring towards finding the common ground between all of us as humans from all around the world, and working together to address the really major issues that we're facing as a species. And for me, a lot of the parties in Canada, if I'm going to talk about Canada specifically, the Liberal Party, the Conservative Party, even the NDP, which is a bit more socialist and more left leaning, I don't think they do it enough. I think I really am aware of the fact that this is the only life I'm going to have. And we're not going to be able to resolve the issues we're facing unless we work together and really start addressing climate change in particular. So I hope that answers that question. And Malik says he agrees with me. He's a socialist. I think making sure everyone is born into a world that is clean, safe, and healthy is key. I think losing the belief in afterlife definitely helped me too. And he wonders if there should be more social safety nets that may help minorities within the secular community. Of course. Well, see, that's the thing. Our society is kind of ass backwards in the way in which all these religious organizations get all these contributions and billions of dollars. And it's well known that the Vatican just hoards all this money and has all these real estate holdings and who knows what else. And yet within the secular community, there doesn't exist a thing that's similar to that. And what some religious people will say is because you don't have a religion binding you and you don't have the strength and power of faith guiding you to do those things. I just think it's just because we as a society don't have the practice to go in that direction, because there's efforts all around the world to try and start secular society, secular community centers that focus on helping each other out. But it's still nascent. It's still in the very beginning stages because religions have had such a monopoly over these things until very recently. And in many countries, they still have that monopoly. That's why those things don't exist. But obviously, having more safety nets for everyone, minorities and otherwise, is so important. All right. And ESEK Brown just says the highest respects for ex-Muslims and my heart to Muslims that are trapped inside it. Thank you very much. I completely agree with that. But yeah, anyway, let's continue with the story. So last thing I touched on was my issues with my sexuality. So I think just the last thing I'll say before I move on to the next topic is that because of the guilt and shame I had, I felt very awkward and ashamed to be around girls, especially if I was interested in them or I liked them. Like I'd sometimes encounter girls in my school, sometimes in my neighborhood, or just like children of family friends, and I'd always be skittish around them. A, because I just didn't have any experience being around girls, and B, because I felt like doing it was wrong. So those things were very intertwined for me. And so by the time I was 16, 17, I had very little to no experience with girls. And around that same time is when I really started having my existential crisis. And this existential crisis is the thing that really sparked me leaving Islam. So I don't know when it started necessarily. It might have started as early as when I was 15. But I just found myself in this phase in my life. It was around 10th or 11th grade where I just couldn't get myself to be motivated to care about anything I was doing. So I started asking a lot of questions to my parents, like why do we exist? Why do I have to go to school? So I'd go from those kinds of intense, abstract ones to just immediate ones of why am I doing what I'm doing in my day-to-day life? And the big questions of why did God even create us? Why do I exist? And I just started thinking about all the steps that I was going to have to take in life. I was just so tired of waking up every morning and taking all these subjects that I wasn't really interested in, and only for me to just go to a university to take a degree and then get a job and get married and have kids. And it just all felt so overwhelming and felt like it didn't feel like these are the things I want to do. This is just what I'm supposed to do as a human being. It's the natural order of things. And I couldn't find the motivation to do them. So like I remember my grades started slipping and I'd show up to school of my uniform uniform in a mess. I'd have my shirt untucked and buttons undone, and my hair would be a mess. I just didn't care about anything. And I wouldn't be doing my homework, and I definitely wasn't praying or reading from the Quran or going to the mosque, or doing any of the things I was supposed to be doing as a Muslim, because I just hated myself. I just started realizing, why am I like this? It must be because I'm bad. There's something wrong with me. I'm I'm malfunctioning in some way. So I'm a bad Muslim. I'm now a bad student, and I'm just this worthless person who doesn't even do anything besides just go to school and eat and sleep and sometimes play video games and watch movies. And sure, this is all coming from a point of privilege, and I knew that there were people who were suffering far more than I was and who had much worse lives than me and who would be grateful to have what I had. And that just added to my guilt about and self-loathing about feeling this way. And year after year, it just got worse, like to the point where I'd have these long, intense conversations with my mother in particular, where I'd just ask her, like, what is the point of all this? And my mother would keep things simple and say that, you have this family that loves you, and she'd say I'm a great person, and that there are good things in life. And I just didn't buy it. I just didn't care. And for the most part, I just did the bare minimum to get through my life. And I'd always be sullen. I'd have a bad attitude about everything. And all the things that used to interest me when I was younger, I just stopped doing them for the most part. I used to love soccer. I stopped playing soccer. I loved reading books and watching movies, and I'd still do that a little bit. But its role in my life became different. Instead of it becoming like this pleasurable activity, it became this escape from my reality, where, okay, I don't have to deal with these unresolved issues in my life. I can just lose myself in this TV show, or I can lose myself in this book, because at least then there's nothing at stake for me. It's the characters who are going through everything. I'm just this invisible observer who's not impacted by anything that's going on. But once the show was over, the movie was over, the book was over, and then I'd be back to my reality, and I try ignoring it once more. And at the time, it didn't really occur to me that Islam would offer me the solutions to getting out of this crisis. It just felt like this additional thing that I'm guilty about and that I'm insufficient for. And I felt just God was disappointed with me, and he was, and I was just failing in his eyes, and I was just failing in the eyes of the Prophet Muhammad, who was also watching me. So him and Allah and all the angels were just watching me sinning and just being this leech person who didn't do anything positive in life. And so this went on for years. And so when the time came for me to finish secondary school, high school, 12th grade, and go to university in Canada, I was just completely unprepared to do that. I just felt like I don't want to move halfway across the world to do some degree I don't care about, just so I can get a job I don't care about, just to make money, just so I can exist. Like, it all felt like all of this work, all this busy work that I was just doing just to be alive, just to keep myself busy. And I couldn't see a way where I could find happiness with like meeting a woman and getting married and having kids. It just felt so abstract and unattainable to me, because I remember thinking, well, I never talk to girls. I've never had a real girlfriend. And yet I'm supposed to just magically find this woman who's going to be my soulmate, and everything is going to be good, and we're going to have a house, and life is going to be wonderful, and all that. And so I didn't have a choice, though. My parents, to their credit, didn't just listen to what I wanted. I just wanted to stay in Dubai and just do something at some school there, and I don't know, just get some sort of job somewhere. I really wasn't interested in doing anything more than that. I was just content to wallow and just stay in bed all day and all night. But they said, no, you have to go to Canada. And they forced me to do all the stuff you have to do to, you know, apply to university, fill out the form, write your essay. And I just didn't know what I wanted to do with my life because I just didn't care about anything. I liked reading books and I liked history, but that isn't really much of a career, is it? Like, I guess you could be a historian or something like that. And I'd always enjoyed writing, so I thought, oh, maybe I could be a journalist. And then I just looked, or I did some research into that, and I saw, oh, well, journalism is dying, and there isn't much money in there. And so I thought, you know what? I'm just going to do what everybody else does. I'm just going to pick some business related thing. So I just picked marketing and I just did it. And so I guess it'll be unsurprising to anyone watching, but my problems didn't just magically disappear once I moved across the world to Canada. If anything, they became worse because here I was now 17, and I moved to Canada alone. So I was living in residence in school in Toronto, and my family wasn't there. Nobody there knew me really. Nobody cared about me. And I remember when my parents left me, so they flew to Canada with me and then they left. The day they left, I just had this moment of realization. I guess this is the kind of realization that happens when people lose their parents, or like both your parents die. I had this feeling that there's nobody here who's there to watch over me anymore. There's no one who cares about what I'm doing. I just have my parents that are thousands and thousands of kilometers away, and I could just literally slit my wrists and die, and nobody will even be able to save me because there's no one around. I could just literally sleep in bed and skip all my classes, and no one would notice, no one would call up on me, no one check in. And that was the toughest part of my life because I really just had to do things for myself, and I had to find my own motivation to do them. And it wasn't always easy. There were a lot of days where I really had to force myself. Also, Canadian winters, especially if you're not used to them, are a bitch. And so I was just there alone, and the sun would be setting at 4:30 p.m. and it would just be dark and cloudy and cold and snowy, and I didn't want to do anything. Uh, but I felt this obligation to my parents to, well, they helped me come here and they're helping pay for my tuition, which a lot of students weren't lucky enough to have. So I owed it to them to at least try, or at least keep passing. And so that's how I motivated myself. But in terms of like a social life or doing anything like that, I did the bare minimum. I do some things here and there, but I never really consistently did anything, and things were just not getting better. I was getting suicidal thoughts all the time, and I'd think about how easy it would be to, I don't know, I'd think about all the different ways I could kill myself. I'd think maybe I could just jump in front of a subway train, but then I had a part-time job at the time, and my boss told me about how he knew, I didn't tell him I wanted to kill myself, but the subject came up, and he told me about how he knew someone who jumped in front of a train and lived, didn't die. I thought, okay, well, that way's out. And I'd start thinking about, I wonder if there's a way of going to the roof of my student residence building, and then I can just jump off. And I think that's when I realized that that was probably the best way to do it and the least painful way to do it. And so clearly I wasn't in a very good mind space, and I didn't really talk to anyone about this besides my mother, who I talked to about it on MSN. If anyone remembers MSN from my generation. And so most of it I just bottled in, and it would just be these repeated conversations in my head of like, I hate myself and my life has no meaning, and there's no point to it all. And around this time, I guess it was just a natural process of where I just began deconstructing everything in my life, because I was just spending way too much time with myself and spending way too much time alone with my thoughts. And I just think about everything. I deconstruct everything to try and demotivate myself in doing it and motivating myself to do it. So I'd think like, what's the point of going to school? Well, like, because you have to do this. Why do you need money? Because society is controlled by money. And it would just be these loops going on and on in my head. And I just couldn't find myself caring about it at all, but I had to, because that's what everyone around me was telling me to do. And I think this process of deconstructing everything finally hit Islam. And so really at this point, I wasn't doing anything Islamic. I think the only thing I was doing was the bare minimum. So I wasn't eating pork. I wasn't drinking alcohol. I was fasting still, and that was pretty much it. I'd pray every now and then, but not consistently and not as much as I was supposed to be doing. And when it came to the subject of Islam, I realized something. Well, this religion isn't helping me. It supposedly had all the answers that I was looking for, the answers for the questions that was troubling me. What is the meaning of life? Worshipping Allah, submitting to Allah and His will, and obeying His commands. Why am I here? Because Allah created me and because He loves me. And what is the purpose of my life? To do good so I can go to paradise and be with Him. So Islam offered all the answers, but it just didn't satisfy me. And I started thinking, why doesn't it satisfy me? Like, what is the thing that is missing in Islam that isn't connecting with me? Because throughout my childhood, and this is something that transcends just Islam for me, actually, like throughout my childhood, I always felt like if I didn't believe in something properly, or I didn't do it properly, then the lack was in me, because I wasn't doing it properly, or I didn't see it the right way. I had to adjust myself to what this thing was. Like, I was a bad Muslim because I didn't try hard enough, because I was lazy, because I was a sinner. I wasn't doing well in school because I was lazy and because I wasn't good at motivating myself. I wasn't ambitious or motivated to do things in life because, again, I'm lazy and I don't care, and I'm just this lazy sinner who just wants to have everything easy and all that. So obviously the problem is with me. I should be listening to what others around me are telling me to do. I'm supposed to do this stuff in university. I'm supposed to be Muslim. And so I started questioning that. Like, why am I supposed to be Muslim? Why is this the thing that is supposed to be guiding me in life? Why are its answers not working for me? Maybe the problem isn't with me. Maybe the problem is with the religion. And once I switched that question around and I switched accusation away from me, and I was always good to accuse myself because self-loathing as I was. Once I shifted it to Islam, that's really when my perspective on it started to drastically change. And I started to think, how do I know that Islam is even true? And I thought about it. Well, everyone around me told me it was true. And I started thinking, well, I've never seen God. I think I felt Him. I think I felt the Muslim equivalent of the Holy Spirit. I think that there's an afterlife. And I asked myself, why do I think those things? And I couldn't think of anything better than, well, because everyone around me believes it, and that's what they tell me. Because for me, uh, especially when you look on social media these days, there's a lot of Muslims that will go at you with the logical arguments or the evidence in the Quran and the Hadith that this couldn't have been man-made. It had to come from Allah, the creator of the universe and everything. But that's not really why I believed. I'd hear stories and examples of evidences of the Quran. I heard it all, like examples of how there's all these number miracles in the Quran. I talk a bit about that stuff in another video. And I knew about it, but it was supplementary to the core belief that, of course, we come from Allah. Everything around me couldn't have come from nothing. And you just look at the trees, which sounds silly. Like, look at the beauty of the mountains. Look at the ocean. Look at like how everything in this world just works harmoniously together. Look at the intricacy of your body. Of course, this couldn't have just happened. That's why it had to come from Allah. And this life can't just be meaningless nothingness. Imagine if this life um, was you just lived and then you died and that was it. Like, so serial killers just get to kill people and then that's it. So it just made sense in this very fundamental way. Of course, there has to be a reason for all this, and of course, that reason has to be good. And I thought, well, why? Why does everything have to have a meaning to it? Why is the ultimate foundation of everything good? Why does there have to be something more than this life? And it just like it hit me overnight, but it just gradually developed in my mind that, oh wait, what if these things are just made up stuff from people and it's just wishful thinking? I thought about it logically in that sense. People face incredible suffering in this life and there's all these things happening and they don't make sense, like people getting cancer or natural disasters just destroying people, good people just dying from an aneurysm at a young age, babies being born stillborn, and it's it's all happening for no reason. And uh, Hitler or whoever, he's not going to be punished for all the sins he committed. No, there has to be a God. There has to be a meaning to all of this. And we can't just cease to exist, or else what is this life? There has to be a record of what we're doing, and there has to be someone caring for us and someone who sees those little good things we do that no one else sees, those little deeds or those things we think in our heads. And we want to know that there's someone else there who listens and who understands and who feels our pain and will compensate our pain with something good. And I thought, what if all of this was just not true? Or if not true, how do I even know it is true? Maybe it is true, but is there a good reason to believe it's true? And I just couldn't see it. I just couldn't see it anywhere. I couldn't see God around me. I couldn't see paradise. I couldn't see the jinn. I couldn't see the devil. I couldn't see anything. And the supposed day of judgment that's supposed to happen, well, there's always been wars. There's always been droughts. There's always been all sorts of catastrophes. And I remember just like from the stuff I learned in history, well, if you look at like any era, people thought that like the apocalypse was coming. Like the people who went through the Cold War in the 60s, people in World War II, people in World War I. You keep going back, and there's always been this feeling of impending doom. And I thought, like, what if this religion stuff and this day of judgment stuff is just like humanity's coping mechanism? So I didn't think that, okay, I know this for sure. Like, oh yeah, it's all man-made, it's all bullshit. But it did open the door to doubt and skepticism. And I thought, what if Islam just isn't true? What if there just isn't a God? What if Allah just doesn't exist? And when I thought about that, the world was very different to me. It felt uncontrolled, chaotic, cold, alien, meaningless. And so in that sense, the doubts didn't really help me come out of my crisis initially, because then my thoughts were, well, if there's no God, then, fuck it all. Uh, let me just go in a corner and die. Maybe I should just kill myself, because now I don't have to worry about God punishing me for killing myself, because that's another sin. You can't escape this life that was forced upon you by God. It's a gift. So I thought, well, without this God, then there really is no incentive for me to live. And I'm really just doing these things for my own sake, or just to kind of perpetuate my sad little miserable existence. And yet I still found myself wanting to live. I still found myself enjoying the little things I enjoyed, whether it was watching a soccer game on TV, or playing a video game, or chatting to a cute girl, or whatever it was. I still wanted those things. I still enjoyed learning some of the stuff I learned in school. I still laughed at jokes. And even though I now had all these doubts about Islam, I still enjoyed those things. Like, it didn't go away. And I thought, well, what does that mean? And I thought, maybe I don't need those things to live my life. And that's when I really started exploring uh, atheist content, like stuff that was being put out there by uh, increasingly popular books by atheists. And it was around this time that the whole Four Horsemen movement of Christopher Hitchens and Daniel Dennett and Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris was beginning to become popular. So we're like in the mid 2000s, like around 2006, 2007. And I would often watch this HBO show called Real Time with Bill Maher. It's an HBO show that basically just has he's like a it's kind of like a talk show where he just interviews panelists who are from the world of politics, but also often celebrities or people of just all these walks of life. And Bill Maher is a atheist comedian, and I started watching a lot of his clips on YouTube where he just makes fun of religion and questions the ideas of it. And I thought, well, okay, I'm not alone in feeling like all this stuff is kind of iffy or lacking in any substance. And I thought, well, if he felt this way and he's like this adult, like there's probably more people around me that feel the exact same way. And of course, I found other comedians like George Carlin, Ricky Gervais, and others who all talk about this. And when I did that, and I felt like, okay, there's others who are having these thoughts about the religion. Sure, they're not Muslim, but they're saying the same things that I'm thinking about Islam. There's a God in the sky. Where is he? Why is he hiding? What's the point of this whole game? And that's when I realized as well that the answers that Islam offers aren't really answers. They're just basically answering mysteries by appealing to bigger mysteries. So the questions I asked earlier that Islam supposedly answers, why do we exist? Because Allah created us. Why did he create us? Because he wanted to. Why did God want to? Because he wants to be worshipped. Why does he want to be worshipped? Because that's just the way God is, so just accept it. and that's kind of the thing that happens with all the other questions of like, what is the meaning of life to please God? Why? Because that's what God wants. Why? Because that's just what God wants. So you just end up hitting this brick wall of this mystery, Allah, and it's unclear why he's doing any of this. And based on what I was taught, it was irrelevant why I was doing this. It's just the way it is, and you're supposed to just accept it and trust in Allah knowing best for you and doing the best for you. And I just felt at that point in my life, no, I want to know the answers. And Islam isn't giving the answers probably because it doesn't know them. It's just claiming to know them and saying trust in this Allah figure. This Allah figure that I couldn't see anywhere around me, and yet I was told existed. Anyway, let's take a pause and see if anyone has anything to say. So ESEK Brown says, to follow your dreams, let your spirit free. Thank you. And that they started studying Islam because a person asked them for help about 15 years ago, and they couldn't help her because of their ignorance, and they haven't seen her since, and asks for her forgiveness. Well, the thing about that is, when you're born into Islam and you're taught that this is the only thing that there is, well, you're not really equipped with the tools to scrutinize it or address questions about it. I definitely wasn't when I was a kid, when I was a practicing Muslim, because I just accepted whatever Mr. Muhammad told me. I accepted whatever my parents told me. And I never looked at anything through like a critical lens, even when it didn't make sense, or even if there were contradictory things I was being taught. Like the example I mentioned earlier, I was so unclear on whether people would go to the hell forever or just for a little while, or if anyone qualified for to go to hell forever, because I heard contradictory things about that, and I felt, well, it's because I'm ignorant and I don't understand. And obviously there's a true uh, logical answer that's correct and valid somewhere. And it is tough because when you encounter other people doubting things that are so fundamental to you and your way of life, I think it's human nature that your reaction will be antagonistic, because if you start letting in the doubt into your life as well, then for Muslims, the underpinning of your life is Islam, and you take that away, you take that foundation away, and you have to find something to replace it, or else it's just this. And this is something that Muslims who I message on social media tell me, well, what is like, well, how do you know what's good? How do you know what to do in life? What guides your morality? It just feels like it's all this nebulous nonsense that can just be changed and shifted. And just to go back to my whole feelings about Islam, I think that's one of those things where Islam just promises us this thing just because the reality is harder to accept and not as malleable to fit within a neat little box for our life. Like, so maybe I open myself to the possibility that maybe morality is just this nebulous, flexible thing that changes. And that made sense when I looked at history. Like, rape used to be fine in a lot of cultures. Owning slaves used to be fine in a lot of cultures. In the Islamic culture, it used to be fine. Like, you'll find Muslims defending that nowadays, but it's not arguable. Like, it's definitely a fact that it was accepted in the time of the Prophet Muhammad, and now it's abhorred. So morality does change, and that's scary to people because they feel like, well, if it changed before, then the thing I believe now is good or bad could change in the future. And that's, as uncomfortable as that is, that's reality. And I really had to open myself up to those possibilities as I was navigating myself out of this crisis and away from Islam. But anyway, before I continue with that, Malik says that for him, Dark Matter, Abdullah Samir, I really recommend his channel, and Genetically Modified Skeptic, also recommend that channel. We're among the many atheist YouTubers they initially ran into when he wasn't sure if the word atheist described me. Yeah, I recommend, I don't know about Dark Matter, but I recommend those other two channels, Abdullah Samir and Genetically Modified Skeptic. And Saif, or Saif, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, asks, how many Muslim friends did you have at uni and how many do you have now? And appreciate the story. Thank you so much. And thank you for the question. So, well, when I came to Canada, I'm Arab, I was Muslim, and I just naturally gravitated towards other Muslims and Arabs, which I think makes sense. That's what most people tend to do. They gravitate towards others who are like them. So I didn't have that many friends in university, especially in the first 2 years. But the few friends I did have were Muslim. My roommate my first year was Muslim. And I wouldn't say we were best friends or anything, but he was a friend, and a few other people in my circle were Muslim. Sorry. But they were more of like the kind of lax Muslims that I was. So they didn't pray very often. And in some cases, some of them drank alcohol and had girlfriends. And of course, I had my judgment hat on towards them, again, to deflect from my own feelings of inadequacy. And funnily enough, one of my best friends in my first couple of years of university, who wasn't Muslim when I met him, converted to Islam after I met him. So it's so funny. Like, as I was transitioning away from Islam and I was stopping doing all the things that you're supposed to do, he converted and became really gung-ho about it. And I actually taught him how to pray. And at that point, I was really disillusioned of Islam. So I felt really weird about teaching someone how to pray. And he told me how he felt like he just had this moment where he realized that it has to be truth, like a spiritual experience. And I was thinking, yeah, sure you did. and how he wanted to find a good woman and marry her and just use Islam as the thing to guide him in life. And at that point, I was like, I'm done with Islam. So understandably, our relationship didn't really last. It kind of fizzled out over the next 2 years. So when I was still Muslim, most of my friends were Muslim, and as I gradually left, those relationships kind of went away, and I started gravitating towards similar-minded people who, for the most part, were atheists. I didn't really have any religious friends in my last 2 years of university when I finally accepted to myself that I was an atheist. And how many Muslim friends do I have now? I do have a couple of Muslim friends. They're mostly just, I wouldn't say they're like great friends, but they're people who I know in my neighborhood, and mostly just people I do things like play soccer with. And so we don't really talk about religion, if that makes sense. A few of them know that I'm an atheist, but the conversation doesn't go further than that. And that's actually kind of like I would say that's progress for me, because I used to just lie and say I was Muslim. When I came across other Muslims, as I've been doing the social media stuff, I've become more comfortable with just people in my own personal life and in the real world of just saying to whoever it is, yeah, I'm an atheist. And if the awkward conversation happens about why I left or what I think about Islam happens, then I deal with it. But I haven't really dealt with it with any friends, kind of because there is an understanding, especially when you're not really close with someone, not to touch subjects like religion. So I'm not opposed to being friends of Muslims just like that nowadays, but I don't think I could ever be like a close friend or have a best friend or anything like that who is Muslim, because there's just so much about that whole religion and life view that I find completely wrong. And it would be awkward sometimes, especially when I was transitioning away from it, where I'd hear a Muslim friend say something that was very homophobic or transphobic or whatever it is, and I just stay silent because I wanted to avoid the awkward conversation. And that's something I wish I hadn't done, and I wouldn't do today. I would actually confront them if that ever came across in my path. And okay, so Puneet Vedi says, hell heaven is the perfect scare tactic by religion, since no one comes back from death to validate if it is true. Exactly. It's the perfect escape clause by all religions who scare humans and sell the concept. Yeah, and that's one of the things I realized as I was doubting Islam, that, well, this is just like the perfect system to just keep people believing and obedient, because you have this invisible, all-powerful God who's watching all you do and has control over you. So obviously you're going to be motivated to obey them. And you have the carrot of the eternal paradise dangling for you in case. So that's what you get if you do the things that you're supposed to do. But if you're bad and you're naughty and you disobey and you leave the religion, then there's this eternal hell for you to be stuck in. And you can't see them, so you can't disprove them, but they're there. And so I think that in of itself is something that keeps so many people believing, especially when they're taught at a young age. So there is that, desire for paradise and fear of hell, but there's also this fear of the unknown. What would you rather face? Well, life, like, I don't know what happens after death, and maybe there is nothing and there is no meaning to it all. Or there's this God and he cares about me and I just have to do the right thing and I'll go to heaven. So obviously that second option will sound more appealing to a lot of people, especially if they're raised into it. So for me, it was a challenge to get over that, because to leave Islam, I had to embrace a reality that was not necessarily all cheery and bright and happy, although it had less of the ugly repercussions that come with the Islamic theology, which if there's some time at the end of this video, I'll get into a little bit. A question from my Lord. Could you speak more about the Arabic of the Quran? You said even though you're an Arabic speaker, you could not understand the Arabic of the Quran. So it wasn't that I couldn't understand it at all. It's just that uh, like I could read it perfectly, for example. It's just there's words that are used in the Quran that just aren't everyday words used, whether like in, slang speech or even in the formal Fusha Arabic. There's words that are have just become obsolete besides being used when it comes to the subject of the Quran or Islam. I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but beyond that, there's also words that have a meaning today that had a different meaning back then, or had a meaning, or had multiple meanings beyond the meanings that I knew the word had in just everyday speech. I think a good comparison for people who aren't familiar with Arabic or the Quran would be um, if you look at something like a philosophy book. Um, Different philosophers use like different terms and expressions in different ways, and they'll mean something specific when it comes to this one philosopher, but it means something else to another, or that word just doesn't exist beyond this philosopher's works. And I think it's the same kind of thing with the Quran. And so you have to remember also that I was coming from having spent the last 4 years as a child living in the West, and I wasn't uh, reading from the Quran every day or using Arabic as often as I was using English. So my Arabic was also very rusty in the beginning. So it took me a while to get caught up to speed again. So that was a bit of a hurdle initially. And this is kind of an aside now, but the thing to remember about the Quran and the Arabic in it is it's a challenge for a lot of Arabic speakers to read the Quran and properly understand what it's trying to say, because there's so much of it that is wrapped up in context or was written for some specific purpose. And so I always think about all the Muslims who aren't Arabic speakers. So people from countries like Indonesia or India and Pakistan, where they don't even speak Arabic at all. And like they'll understand a little bit, but they don't really know the language at a sophisticated level. And I'd argue you have to have a sophisticated knowledge of Arabic to fully and properly understand everything that's being said in the Quran. And so what do they rely on? They rely on imams and the teachers in the madrasas, the schools, to tell them what everything means. And you should just draw the parallel with the schism that happened between Catholicism and Protestantism. One of the reasons why Protestantism became a thing was because a lot of people were tired of all these Christian ceremonies being done in Latin, which is a language that commoners just didn't speak or understand, and people wanted their Bible and the ceremonies to be more accessible and in their native tongues instead of in Latin. But that wasn't good for Catholicism, and it isn't good for Islam to have that kind of control with the people, to have, like, say, an easily understandable holy book, because then they don't control the dissemination of information. If you need a teacher telling you what to think, then that teacher controls what you believe, especially when it's a religion. And I will say that there are efforts by the Muslim community nowadays to make the Quran more, and the Christian community, to make their holy books more easily understandable. And I think that's for the benefit of the followers of both those religions, because then they can actually see the words of those books for themselves and see the often horrifying ideas in them for themselves, and try to figure out if they stand for that stuff or not. But yeah, hope that answered your question, my lord. Okay, we're almost up to 2 hours now. So the last couple of things I wanted to talk about is just kind of finishing off the process of how I left Islam. So as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the stuff of my existential crisis was internal. All these thoughts and thinking and overthinking about every aspect of my life. Like, why do I want to meet people? Why am I interested in this? Like, I just put everything under this intense microscope. So I didn't talk about it with anyone else. It was all internal. And in retrospect, I think I had to do it that way just so I could figure things out for myself. It probably would have taken less time if I talked to a therapist or was open with my feelings of other people. But I think it did benefit me in the long run, because I'd say now there's no idea or thought that could truly shake me to my core, because I've already put myself through every possible horrifying, troubling, upsetting idea possible about myself and about the world around me and about the people around me. And with that being said, when it came to my parents, I gradually, and I wouldn't say carefully, but every now and then I'd drop little hints that I was having these doubts about Islam. I'd tell them a joke about Islam, or I'd mention something that didn't make sense to me. And they seemed pretty receptive overall. And I thought, like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And it did make sense to me, because I always felt, well, my parents are these terrible, like, sinful, lazy Muslims. So maybe they're not that opposed to me criticizing it. But I still wanted to figure it out, figure it out for myself. So that's when I started exploring Islam more deeply, and I started just looking into the supposed evidence for it. So I talk about emotional stuff, like the appeals to the ignorant of, like, where did everything come from? It had to come from a God. Everything can't come from nothing. And how that all felt to me like just an appeal to a bigger mystery. So I looked into the Quran, which is supposedly a miracle, and I looked into the Hadith and how it's supposed to dispense all this amazing knowledge. And I just couldn't see good arguments for how any of this was actually good evidence. So the Quran is supposed to be a miracle because a person couldn't have written it. And there's the famous Quranic challenge of Allah saying in the Quran itself, I challenge someone to just write one verse, one ayah that's as good as any in the Quran, and they can't. And that's what I was taught in school too, that this is impossible. It has been tried and people failed. And I started thinking about it a bit. How is this test being assessed? And what is being assessed exactly? So this verse has to match the beauty and the literary perfection of the Quran, supposedly, which couldn't have been man-made. And so keeping that aside, of like, how do you know something wasn't man-made? Then who made it? That doesn't necessarily mean it came from Allah, the creator of the universe. What if it was made by, I don't know, super intelligent aliens that are just messing with us? I don't know. Aside from that, I just thought, like, how can you judge the literary perfection or beauty of something? Isn't that subjective? And what is perfection anyway? That something conveys the meaning it's supposed to mean with the least amount of letters. Is that really beauty, or is that just mechanical efficiency? And can you even say something that is a work of art is perfect anyway? Isn't that completely subjective? And like, we're just this, I won't go into like a lot of other examples, but I did the same kind of thing with all the other supposed proofs that the Quran couldn't have been man-made. And I just reached the same conclusion that, well, how do we really know that this leads to Allah? There's examples of prophecies in the Quran, and I just found that the prophecies were either really vaguely worded, and I thought, like, well, what if someone has just been reading the Quran over and over and over again and just made the connection here, like, oh, maybe this thing is talking about that here, or some other thing is talking about this thing clearly. And I just thought, like, could it be possible that it's just all these Muslims poring over the Quran, reading its pages over and over and over again for hundreds and hundreds of years, just looking for anything that they could say is a prophecy to boost their own faith? Then obviously you're going to find something in a long enough book that you can make fit. Same with all the numerical miracles. I just imagined that it had to be people just counting, like, oh, well, paradise is mentioned this many times and hell is mentioned this many times. It's a miracle. It has to be from God. And the reason I don't want to go too into the weeds of all this stuff is because these proofs of the Quran be indicating that Islam is true have the same problem. Even if we accepted that all these things are true, like so the prophecies are correct, these numerical miracles are miracles and they couldn't just be random coincidences, or they're beyond the capability of a human to do, or I can't remember the other thing I mentioned, but anyway, let's accept that all these things are true. Why is the natural conclusion then it has to be from Allah, the creator of the universe? All we can really say is we don't know how it came to be, and they don't prove that everything else in the book or the religion is true. Just because there's a correct prophecy in the Quran or a couple of correct prophecies, that doesn't make the whole book and all of its claims true. It makes those prophecies true, sure, but that's about it. And I just saw that, like, this is just an example of the mentality of Muslims who want to believe. They're not starting from a skeptical position of, like, a true doubting position of, I don't believe in this. I'm presented this evidence and now I believe it. It works the other way around. I believe this. So now I'm going to look to find the evidence that fits my belief. And if there isn't any evidence, then I'll just find something because this thing has to be true. And that's the problem with a lot of the apologetics of Muslims and Christians alike, where they're clearly starting with this bias where they just want to believe and they want to find the things that fit their beliefs because they're already sold. So they're not trying to find things that are good pieces of evidence. They're just trying to find things that will convince them that it's true. So beyond just these kinds of examples, just like all the weird and bizarre arguments, the logical arguments that Muslims will get into, like the Kalam cosmological argument is one. I don't know how you can get to Allah of Islam specifically in those kinds of arguments, because even if we were to accept that these arguments aren't filled with assumptions and we accept them, just because there might be a creator of the universe, or there has to be a creator of the universe, which even that I'm skeptical about. How do we know it's Allah? Muslims will say, well, because that's what we believe Allah is. Okay. Other people believe different things, so how do we know who's right and who's wrong? We don't. So it's just this bias, like it's just this bias in all these things. And once I got rid of the bias for myself, it just all fell away. And I saw that there's nothing really there. What do I have? Just wishful thinking, a feeling I occasionally had when I prayed and did the things God told me to do, which I was starting to think, what if I just felt that way because I was indoctrinated to feel good when I obeyed the commands of this invisible Allah. So what was left? Wishful thinking, bad evidence, and a hope that all this world is just not meaningless existence and just humans floating in space in this big uncaring universe. Well, I decided to myself then that if I'm going to lead my life the way I want to lead my life, I have to accept reality for what I see it as, for what the world around me is. I can't escape into fantasies or hopes that there's something different or something better, because that would be cheating myself out of this only life that I have. So at this point, I stopped believing that I had an afterlife to look forward to. I stopped believing that if my parents were murdered, that there would be a cosmic justice for their murder if the killer was never caught. I stopped believing that if I had some kind of tragic, horrible accident, that it had some purpose or meaning behind it. It just happened. And that's what life was. It just happened. And it isn't easy to accept all those things because I'm more fortunate than others in that I haven't had that many bad things happen to me in life. But I do have to accept that I'm going to die. And for all I know, I have no reason to think otherwise. I'm going to just cease to exist. And that was really upsetting to me. And it still upsets me every now and then, to be honest. It's like this whole idea of just not existing anymore, and that everything that I ever was and everyone who ever knew me would just cease to exist as well. It would be like all of this was just nothing. But what helped me was I changed my perspective on it. Instead of thinking of how, oh, this is sad, this is bad, and like, well, this will all go away, so it doesn't matter. I just looked at it as this is all I have. This is all I'm gonna get. So what do I want to do? Do I want to wallow and wish that there was something better, or be sad that there isn't something more, or that life continues, or that I get to exist forever, whatever it is, or that there's a God who cares about me? If I just believe in this God, then everything will be better. La di da di la di da. I just didn't want to do that. I didn't want to lie to myself. It felt like I was cheating myself out of like a genuine existence in life. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't just like walk around and lie to myself every day. I didn't want to do it. And so I decided I wasn't going to do it anymore. Like I wasn't going to believe in all this stuff. And I wanted to make the most out of it. This is the only life I have. So I'm going to go out there and try to get what I can and try to make the world a better place, because that's what makes me feel good. Not because some God tells me to, but because I see the suffering of the people around me and it hurts me. And it feels good to do good things. It feels good to create things. To me, I just started remembering all the things that I loved doing. I loved playing soccer. I loved playing sports. I loved writing. I loved reading. And I wanted to go back to all of those things. And I didn't want to lose them because I cared about them. These were things that even in my lowest moments, I never lost my love for them. I just lost my motivation for doing them. And instead of thinking, well, nobody's going to ever read this book of mine that I wrote, or no one's going to remember my name, and even if I fall in love with someone and we get married, she's just going to die, I'm just going to die, and then that's it. I thought, no, I'm getting the opportunity to create something. I'm getting the opportunity to write this book and to just express myself. I'm getting the opportunity to meet someone to fall in love with, and we'll have this time together, and it's better than nothing. Because I'm born. I didn't have a choice in being born, but here I am. I exist. I care about these things that I care about, and I want to make the world a better place. And even though I didn't have Islam anymore, it was still important to me. And when I saw it was still important to me, I realized that there was something there. And for all the people who might say to me, well, you're just following the morality of the moment, and you're just looking to get like the simple, if not simple, the carnal pleasures of this world, of materialism and sex and whatever it is. And you don't have anything that's like a foundation, an objective, eternal foundation to tether yourself to. What I would say is, we as humans, we live in a context. I live in this context of this present day and age. If I lived 500 years ago, I probably would be a completely different person with completely different beliefs. And in this context that I am in, I am trying to live my life in the way that we as humans around us see is the best way possible. There's no universal ideas or moralities, that moral beliefs that we can cling to beyond maybe a couple of things. But they aren't universal in the sense that they're eternal. They're universal to us as humans. We care about other human beings. We want to be around other humans. We want to find love. We want to find happiness. And those are the things that are most important to me. And maybe that will change in the future. I doubt it. But I think those are the things that I would say are the values that underpin my morality, and it doesn't need a God. It doesn't. And even if, as I mentioned earlier, even if at the end of it all it turned out that there was a God, whether it's the Islamic God or otherwise, because I guess can't say 100% sure that there isn't one. I'm comfortable in stating to whoever that God is, if they want to punish me or not, that I went into this life with the mind you gave me, and I used this mind to leave Islam based on what I saw around me and how I thought and felt. And I just didn't see the good evidence for it to stay a Muslim and or stay a theist, whatever. And if this God still punished me because of that, then we're in a hellish situation anyway, because this God is a complete moral monster. And to imagine that reality, which isn't that far from the reality that Islam envisions of this God that is dictating to us, while he's invisible somewhere, what is good and what is wrong, and dangling hell and heaven in front of us, is kind of despicable, especially when he didn't need to create us because he's all powerful and all knowing, and he didn't need for this life to exist anyway, or this universe to exist. He just did it. He followed Islamic logic. So that's a truly horrifying reality, and I would take this reality that comes without objective good and without objective justice or cosmic justice and without an afterlife over it any day. But it took years to be able to finally say that to myself. So to any ex-Muslims who are watching this, or people who are debating leaving the religion, I'm not saying it's easy to leave it. It was one of the hardest things I ever had to do. But I think it's worthwhile in the end, because then you live honestly and you live for yourself and the human beings around you, instead of assigning it all to some deity. Yeah. Let's see if anyone has anything to say. Let's see. Okay. My Lord says, thank you. Solid criticism of Islam that a God would reveal his final message to all mankind in a language that is spoken and understood by less than 5% of the population of the world. Yeah, you'd think if God wanted to, like truly wanted to, he'd find a better way to communicate his message than a book, right? I mean, if Islam's God is real, then wouldn't he just, and if he actually wanted people to believe in him, why wouldn't he just give us all the capacity and ability to understand his message and believe him from within? What Muslims will say is, well, he wants to test us. Well, and why does he test us? Because then it would be boring for him. I don't know. That's when you get into the whole free will argument. I'm not going to get into that in this video, but I think it's essentially bunk. It makes no sense that Allah would create all of this and then just want to test us, unless he was a sadistic person or a sadistic entity that is just looking to mess with us, especially when he already knows what we're going to do, because he's all knowing. So who knows? Ultra significant footnote asks, do you think there could exist some old manuscripts from skeptical fingers in the beginning of Islam, like Al-Rawandi, or do you think it was all burnt? Who knows? Who knows? I do know that there's been thinkers, like atheist thinkers, throughout history, and who wrote about it, and who had to hide or kind of be vague about how they're writing it. So it's tough to say. There's nothing that I'm 100% aware about that I would say is like an atheistic creed or an atheistic philosophy. But if anyone knows of anything, feel free to share in the messages. ESEK Brown says, I am Christian, but nowhere in the New Testament Jesus said build brick churches with kings in them. He said go and the good news to the people. And it is very clear to me that Jesus' message was, I'm here with you, talk to me. I don't know Christianity as well as Islam, obviously, but I think Christianity has a lot of the same problems. as Islam, in that it's basically built on faith and poor evidence. But I do think that a lot of the people who follow Christianity as well as Islam, they want to believe it for the good things or the positive things in it, and they kind of ignore all the bad stuff. I would just say that you can have the good things in both those religions, and you don't have to believe in gods or angels or heaven and hell to get those things. Yeah. And H. Sergeant G says, "Hello, your story reminds me of mine, but less intense. An ex-Catholic atheist from France." Well, that's the thing. Like, my story isn't even that intense compared to some of the things that other ex-Muslims go through. And I guess I'll end this video soon. The last thing I wanted to just talk about, and this is the thing that I would say makes me more privileged than most ex-Muslims, and that made my journey of leaving it easier, much easier, I think, than others, is that when I finally told my parents, and I think I was around 19 or 18 at the time, so I left Islam when I was 18. When I finally told them that, you know what, I'm an atheist, I don't believe in Islam anymore, I think Islam is actually pretty harmful in all sorts of ways. Like, it made me homophobic. It gave me all this shame about my sexuality, and made me judgmental of other people, of other faiths, and of other Muslims. And I don't believe it anymore. They were very accepting. And it was over the years that I realized why they were so accepting. And this is something that they concealed for the most part, obviously not very well, because I just noticed that they were not good Muslims, was they weren't religious either. So my parents, I guess the best way to describe them would be that they're culturally Muslim. And what they decided to do when they were raising me and my brother was to teach us about Islam and tell us that we're Muslim, and tell us about God and all that, but not force it upon us and let us learn for ourselves. And so all that time, when I noticed them not doing anything, they weren't doing anything because they weren't practicing Muslims. And they just didn't want to tell me because they didn't want to affect my choice. And I have to be honest, when I finally left and they explained that to me, I was angry at them. I was angry at them because instead of taking an active role as my parents in my religious upbringing, which I would say, when you're taught a religion like Islam is one of the most important things in your life, they allowed the teachers in my school, the first Mr. Muhammad and the second Mr. Muhammad, to fill my head with all this stuff, fill my brother's head with all this stuff. And it reached the point where when my parents would tell me, "Oh, don't worry about that, God loves you," or bad things aren't going to happen to you, you're a good person, I wouldn't believe them, because I'd be like, well, I'm a better Muslim than them, and they don't know anything about Islam anyway. They don't even know how to pray. So why should I listen to them? I should listen to Mr. Muhammad, the one who's warning me about all these hellish things that are going to happen to me if I don't do the right thing. And I think that their lack of taking an active role, or at least a balancing role, in my Islamic upbringing caused a lot of problems for me that could have been avoided. So I was mad at first, but I understood why they were doing it, because I think they were doing the better thing that a lot of religious parents don't do, which is allowing their kids to figure things out for themselves and decide if they want to follow this religion themselves, by taking less of an immediate role in their upbringing, like offering them the information and then letting them decide for themselves. It's kind of my wish that most religious parents would do that with their kids, because then their kids could decide for themselves. But I think that's something that religious people are terrified of doing, especially if they really believe that there's a hell and that their kids might go to it if they become disbelievers or sinners, or B, they're worried about how it will reflect on the family and reflect on them if their kids just become atheists, like, especially if you live in tight-knit Muslim community out here in the West, in Canada or elsewhere, or in a Muslim country. Imagine And that's what my parents explained to me. We didn't want you to, this is what they told me, we didn't want you going to school and talking about how there is no God or anything like that, because that could have caused all sorts of problems, not just for me, with my classmates. I was already an outsider. Imagine if I said things like that, it might have caused problems for my parents. We were living in a Muslim country after all. So I understand why they did it, but I do wish they had taken more of an active role to just tell me it's okay to not believe in God, or just it's okay if you choose another path, because I felt like I had no other choice but Islam. And for religious parents, it's too scary to do that, because it just comes with all these repercussions. That's how Islam and other religions work. They just intertwine themselves in the culture, in the fabric of the society, where it just becomes unconscionable to leave, where the social ramifications beyond just the spiritual ones are just overwhelming. And I think that's the reason why so many people, especially in this day and age with all the information we have in our fingertips, are still religious. Sure, there's the aspect of it where people want something to believe in, they want to have faith in something greater than themselves and all that. But there's also the fear of what will happen to you if you don't follow that religion anymore. It's so intertwined with our identities in many cases that doing so could cause death for a lot of people, and it does. Like, people get killed over this kind of stuff. And I'm fortunate enough to have the parents that I had who, although they didn't give me as much guidance as I hoped they did when it came to the subject of religion, they gave me the guidance to think for myself, to be analytical, to trust in myself. Although I didn't trust in myself for such a long time, to finally escape from just being told by others what I should be doing in my life, whether it was Islam or institutions like universities or society at large telling me I have to get married and have kids. So I ended up not even following the major I did in university. So as I mentioned earlier, I always loved writing, and so that's what I do now. I went into journalism, even though I knew it was a dying career and all that, a dying field. I figured I'd rather spend my life doing what I love to do rather than just suffering and doing this job I hate just so I can make $100,000 a year or whatever it is. And that's the kind of mentality that I try to have in all aspects of my life, where I want to do what feels right to me, even if it's not what society around me is doing, and even if people don't disapprove. Even if people don't approve. And that's the main reason why I wanted to do this stuff on social media, just talking about Islam and how I kind of came to find the secular spirituality that guides my life today. If I shared these thoughts and feelings with people in the community who know me, in my neighborhood, or if I shared it publicly, professionally, there could be all sorts of repercussions. And I wanted this outlet to be able to share, because, like I said, a lot of people don't even have the capability to safely do this from their homes, even if it's anonymous, or if they just want to do a video. And so I wanted to do it, because if I don't do it, I don't know who will. Sure, there's other ex-Muslims doing it, and that's encouraging to see. But I think as I do it, more people will do it, and that will hopefully normalize the conversation, where ex-Muslims don't have to be terrified and they don't have to hide these things anymore. Now, that's like a long way off from happening in the Muslim world, but I think it's starting to happen more and more. Sorry, there's a fly. Happening more and more in the Western world, within Muslim communities that live in those countries. And that's where we got to start. Because if we're not heard and we don't share our opinions, then no one knows about us. And I hope by doing this video and other videos that whoever's watching and whoever finds this video later on will better understand the kind of issues I went through and why Islam didn't really answer them for me, and why I ultimately left them. Islam, for me, the most important thing about it was what it gave me in terms of promises of an afterlife, and for it being true. I followed it because I thought it was true. And once that went away, then I just saw that all these restrictions and things that it had in it were just like draconian and nonsensical. Once I took away the fact that God, the perfect creator of the universe, bestowed upon us these rules and commands, then it just fell away. Like, why not eat pork? Sure, it made sense 1400 years ago. Does it really matter today? Pork is safe to eat. It just doesn't make sense. Um, why can there not be sex before marriage? Because it's a sin and it tears the fabric of society. Does it really? I'm not saying that it's like always a perfect ideal thing to have like sexual relationships outside of marriage, but to just institute it as a blanket rule like that and say that people who violate this rule are going to go to hell, it's ridiculous. And I think about all the people who are just shamed for who they are because they happen to be gay or they happen to be bisexual or whatever. If they're not harming anyone, why can't they just do that? Because this religion says so? Because this religion says they're an abomination, that they're going to go to hell for it? So, like, even if I didn't believe Islam was true, I didn't want to follow it anymore because it had all these rules that just didn't make sense to me or were just so cruel. And once I let it go, I was able to just focus on the things that actually mattered to me and that were there for me throughout my life without Islam. I thought Islam was all that I was, or a core part of what I was. And to my surprise, when I finally let it go, I found, well, I'm still this person. I still care about these things. And I still want to live my life. And 14 years later, I guess it's been 14 years, I still feel the same way. I I have no yearning of no, some technical issues there. I think I'm back. So yeah, that's my story of why I left Islam. Before I go off the stream, let's see anyone asked questions for me. Feel free to put them in the live chat. My Lord says, "I'm glad that you're not just an atheist, but that you're also a skeptic. You do not leave Islam for another religious superstition." Well, yeah. I know that's a thing that happens with a lot of people where they're unhappy with a religion, so but they still want the things that religion offered them, which is, I think, for most people, just like a community, and they just gravitate towards another religion. I mentioned my friend who found Islam when I left. He went from Christianity to Islam, and there's a lot of people who go from Islam to Christianity, and there's a lot of people who go from those religions to Buddhism or whatever. But for me, they all essentially have the same problem of not having good evidence for them and seeming to be built on wishful thinking and a hope for more meaning to life than actually exists or that we actually know can exist. That doesn't mean there is no meaning to life. I think we create our own meaning, and I just don't take it from religion. Essex Brown says, "You guys got to remember the human priorities have always been survival, not to be eaten and eat, and procreation. We evolved reacting to fear. It is in our nature to react to bad news and circumstances." Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I can see why religions that were based on fear evolved. I think it's just like a reality of our human nature, but it's hopefully one that we're growing past. And Philly S says, "Ex-Muslim from France, humanism is the way." I completely agree. But yeah, if no one has any other questions, I guess I'll end the stream. What I will say for anyone who wants to check out my story or my written posts in more details, you can go to my Twitter, which is leaving_Islam, or my Instagram, which is @leavingislam. I'll put the links in the description. And if you just scroll down all the way to the beginning, you can kind of see a longer version of my story than what I just shared in this video. And feel free to subscribe as well to those accounts and to this YouTube channel if you want to have more content just talking about Islam and other religions. I'm going to talk about Islam for the next few videos, but I'm going to start talking about other religions and a bit more about my secular life philosophy and all that entails in future videos. So I hope you can join me in those as well. And thank you everyone who came to watch. I really appreciate people engaging me and asking questions. And I hope to anyone who's out there who's an ex-Muslim or a doubting Muslim or whatever for any other religion, that I hope my story helped you in just processing what you're going through right now, and in helping you to see that you're not alone. There's a lot of people who are going through this or have gone through this, and there is a light at the end of the tunnel. It's just not the light of heaven, I guess. All right. Thank you again, everyone. Let's end this.